Hi, I'm Jane Farnham from Great British Speakers, and I'm here today chatting to the amazing transgender speaker, Matt Ellison. Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'm really excited to chat to you and find out more about you. So tell me a little bit about your formative years.
Yes, so as you've mentioned, I'm transgender, and so I was born physically female but psychologically male, always male inside, and life was really, really difficult. So it's some people say to me, when did you realise that you were trans? And it wasn't that I realised I wanted to be a boy. It was actually that I realised I wasn't a boy. So I wanted various things and I couldn't get what I wanted. So, and I was really, really young. There was a few things I said to my family and realized that this wasn't going to be accepted. And I then made a decision at the age of 5, which was not my earliest memory, that I wasn't going to be able to act on this. So basically, my formative years consisted of me knowing that I wasn't what I thought I should have been or wanted to be, and yeah, at a really, really young age, I couldn't talk to anyone. I had no information. There was no internet. So I just had to struggle. I literally was, wished that I had not been born and just doing what I could to survive, basically.
So how did that feel? I mean, what were the feelings that you had that made you know that that was the case?
I Gender is a really weird thing. It's not something you can put your finger on. It's just this innate feeling inside. So everything from my mannerisms that I wanted. I remember at one point I was a little bit older. My mum saying, "God, do you even have to walk like a boy?" to me, and the clothes you want to wear, the things you want to do, the people you want to hang out with, everything is just you've just got this feeling that people, if you're born in the right gender and how you feel, you can't appreciate because everything just matches, so it's all good. And so, you know, you can't, let's say it's really difficult to actually describe, but you just know there's it's this innate feeling inside you. Um, and
So,
it
so that was sort of like so it was like a slow process. Was it quite gradual realization, or was it something
no,
from the start? Then, as you it just
yeah, it was more like I say, realizing. I think the thing is, if you imagine, if you take a really, really small child, 3, for example, you get very girly girls and very boyish boys, etc., and they know they just you're not it's not nurture, they just are what they are. And so younger than that, as a really tiny baby, it doesn't matter what gender you are. And
no.
so I was born and I probably didn't even give it a second thought until I go, can I have an action man? And I don't get it. Can I wear those camouflage trousers? And I'm not allowed to. And then they put me in a dress and it's like, okay, but all these boys, which is what I'm kind of looking at, wishing I was like, are able to do that. So why is life not fair? Why can't I do that?
So it's really hard. Obviously, like as you say, as somebody who is comfortable and born in the right body, to imagine this dramatic change. And you said there was simply no help for you at that stage either.
No, not at that age, because it was one of those things, when you have friends and you confide in them, and then you drift apart for whatever reason, and then you think, oh, I wish I'd never told them that because that was something really personal. And this was just so big for me. It was huge, and there was no way I was telling a soul because it meant they could tell someone else, or you didn't know what was around the corner. And so yeah, I was just alone with absolutely no help whatsoever
God.
until the internet came along, which in some ways that actually made it harder because I'd already put my barriers up, I'd already made my mind up. I was not going to act on this, and now I was actually learning and seeing what hormones, etc., could do, and longing for it. So that was like a kick in the teeth, if you like, thinking, no, but if I took testosterone, I could grow a beard, my voice would break, I'd get muscles, my fat would redistribute, everything would be better. And yet I've already said, no, I can't do it. So that was really hard.
So going back then, how did so because it was quite late in life that you actually transitioned.
Yeah.
So how did you cope? I mean, there's so many questions that I have for you. I don't know where to start. The first thing I wanted to know is how how did you cope then throughout your teens and your 20s and your early 30s? Were you living as a man or were you living as a woman at that stage?
I was living as a tomboy. which
Right.
for me as a female to male is lucky because it's easier. People accept tomboys. It's almost celebrated, isn't it? Your GI Jane, your tough women.
Yeah.
Whereas for a man to be feminine isn't, and they're much more likely to get bullied. So I was quite lucky in that respect. So I just lived as a tomboy, but this is where some of the things come up that people haven't considered, because what I had several coping mechanisms in place, and one of them was around the clothes that I felt comfortable in, or at least that I could survive in, and that felt least uncomfortable. So I would dress very androgynously in jeans and a t-shirt. But if you think that, and as clothes tend to get smarter, they get more gendered. So this meant that I wasn't in a million years going to go and put on smart women's office clothes and go and work in an office. So that hindered my career choices. Um, so that meant that it affected my everyday life, most of my life, but also my income and my standard of living, just because I couldn't wear the clothes I felt comfortable in. So this is one of those things that people go, "Wow, I'd never even considered that." There are so many different things that actually, when you can't be yourself, you're stifled, you're hindered. And this is where, for organizations, I feel it's so important. And not just for me, but for the people around
Mm.
me or other minority groups as well, is that actually, by the time people have sort of heard my story and heard how rubbish life can be, and then how amazing it is when I can actually be me and just, it's like a weight off my shoulders. So I bounce out of bed in the morning now and I love my work, etc. So you'd much rather have Matt come to work for you than me before I was Matt,
Yeah.
because I'm going to be a better employee and my colleagues around me will work better because the team, the environment is just going to be friendlier and nicer and easier.
So going back then again, how did the people that you loved around you react, your friends, your close friends and family, when you eventually sort of told them?
Yeah. And I mean, this is one of the big fears, is how people will react. And just to add a point as well, as people go, "Oh, but you find out who your friends are." But there's a 93% reduction in suicide risk if for a trans person if their parents are supportive. So that
I was
is
just going to
massive.
come on to the mental health
Yeah,
issue as well,
yeah.
but yes, talk me through
Yeah.
it.
So I was really scared, obviously, but in terms of your question, everyone was just amazing. I could not have asked for a better response from everyone around me, and it's not just the close friends. What about the people? They'll see you changing on the checkout person in your local supermarket or your favorite restaurant. The waiters in there, they're not people you can sit and have a conversation with. So it's a really difficult choice, but everyone was just absolutely amazing. And in fact, the biggest sort of response I got was that they were shocked but not surprised because I lived as a tomboy. Which actually, for some trans people that don't do that, and particularly, like I say, because I think it's easier for a female to act more butch, but for trans women, very often, not always obviously, but very often they'll hide these feelings. So they will almost go the opposite way and try and toughen themselves up and, join the army or something like that. And so when they come out and say to their loved ones, that's a shock because they could not see that coming at all, almost the opposite. And for
Yeah.
them, then for the loved ones around them, they're sort of thinking, well, are you sure? Is this, yeah? But actually, that person's been living with this inside them for their entire life, even if they don't know. That's another thing to point out. Although it's there, you're born with this. Some trans people like myself just know that they wanted to be the opposite gender, whereas some people, they know something is up, but they haven't figured it out yet. And they tend to hit puberty, possibly think that they're gay, and then realize, no, actually, it's something else. But in hindsight, they 9 times, well, 99.999% of the time, they'd say, yeah, in hindsight, it was obvious that this is what the issue was.
So the fact that you had support from your family and friends
Yeah,
meant that, your mental health was probably a lot better than some other people in your position.
yeah, no,
Um, I'm going to ask you something quite contentious then, because obviously you were quite late transitioning.
yeah,
There's a big debate and controversy at the moment around
yeah,
the age of people who decide to transition, maybe slightly too young, and then regret it at a later stage. I know this is, a big debate at the moment. So I know that you inherently knew from the get-go. Do you think that there is a case where some people are confused and they're not quite, I mean, I know teenage years are confusing anyway, and younger
yeah.
years are confusing. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Bearing in mind that you transitioned quite late, but
yeah,
you always knew that you were,
yes.
that's what you wanted.
Again, I think I'm in a lucky position. Not lucky that I had to wait that long, obviously, but given those circumstances, because people went, "Oh, you must know, you're old enough to know." Whereas, no, if you're trans, you just are trans. And I think the issue comes from, there's a really good endocrinologist called Norman Spack who explains this brilliantly. But you do get some children that go through stages of cross gender play or dressing, and it is just a phase. But it's a bit like sexuality. Once hormones start kicking in, that's when that all figures itself out. So basically, what he says is that by the time an individual reaches puberty, if they're still saying no, I'm in the wrong body, then they're transgender. And if
Right.
you think about it in terms of medical transition and stuff like that, you can't do anything physically until you get to puberty anyway. There's nothing to change. So all you can do is let someone change their name and their identity. You can let them wear the clothes that they feel comfortable with, play the toys with the toys they want to play with, etc. They can go to school as that person. And if by any chance it is not right for them and they grow out of it, they will have done so before any medical intervention can happen.
Mm.
And even then, for me, I think that's the point that we should be able to. I think eventually, in 50 years' time, it's a no brainer. We'll look back and go, why did we do it differently? Is that's when we can start hormones. But we've got blockers, which is
Yeah,
a really controversial. I actually want to
yeah, I
write
think
a
that's
paper.
the issue at hand here,
Yeah,
isn't it?
but
Giving
that just
giving
buys you a bit extra
medication
time.
too young to a child who might simply not have reached puberty and had those
Yeah,
hormones.
but we don't give medication to anyone that hasn't reached puberty because there's nothing to change.
Mm.
At that point, there's nothing you can change. So it's just clothes, which
But
does no
what are
harm.
puberty blockers would be something to.
Puberty blockers happen at puberty, so that just delays puberty. And then if they decide when they reach 16 or 18 or whatever the age is, oh no, this isn't right for me, which, like I say, is not likely to happen, then they can come off blockers and they'll go through their normal puberty. The only downside with that is fertility, because yes, a trans person is definitely trans, but at that age, are they old enough to make a decision to make themselves infertile, which that going down that route would? But the amount of harm that's done by not treating, I think, is far, 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 far greater. I shouldn't have to have scars across my chest because I went through the wrong puberty, and I would be taller. My hands would be bigger. I wouldn't have wide hips. For trans women, their voice wouldn't break, which doesn't unbreak. So they either have to learn to talk in a higher pitched voice, or they go through their life not passing on the phone and people kind of not understanding them and growing 6'5" or something. So puberty blockers would stop all that. And I think the regret rate for trans people, it used to be anyway about 2%. And so we're holding back 98% of people and making them go through a horrible life and have issues to deal with for the sake of 2%, by
Mm.
saying we can't treat, we've got to make sure. And I'm sure that actually a lot of that regret comes because people weren't treated soon enough, and society is so horrible to them that that's what they regret. It's not that they regret the transition, if they don't pass because they've gone through the wrong puberty. And it's amazing what hormones can do. People don't realize that. They think they'll always spot a trans person, but there's so many of us out there that have transitioned 100% successfully, pass as male or female, whichever way we are. But for those few that don't, and then they get ridiculed and bullied, etc., and can't get employment and just discriminated against, that's why they regret. It's not the transition. That's what I think, anyway.
So, but you just said that, society was horrible to,
Yeah.
that's not your experience?
It's not my experience personally to the people around
That's
me,
really sad. So
but it still is. It still is. I see it online a lot, and I see trans people that have lost contact with their parents because of it. And one of the things I do is mentor trans people. And again, I've had it where people have transitioned socially before they've started hormones, and I say it's particularly difficult for male to female. And they go on the bus and they just get tormented because they look like a man, but because they haven't started hormones yet. That will change physically because they can, things can change, but it's it's the people that don't know you. I think it's the thing is with me is my interaction is with people that know me, and hopefully they like me, and so they go, oh, okay, well, you're human. I know you're human. But when they don't know, it's fear of the unknown, and people just don't know enough about trans stuff. And you know, one of the
I
things
agree.
you mentioned about all people regretting, that's almost it's like a plane crash. You know, if there's a plane crash, we hear about it, but we don't hear about the millions and millions of planes that never crash,
Mm.
or car crashes that do crash it, because you know, and this is like that. So for us, because we're able to come out, transition, get our treatment, and then you know develop in the identity that our new identity, and we disappear back into society. People don't realize how many of us there are and how successfully we can transition, because you
Well,
only hear about the bad cases, which are very few, very very few.
good point, well made. Now, you mentioned earlier about the, the things that we would never consider,
Yeah,
and you mentioned clothing, and
yeah,
also how much it could have potentially held your career back.
yeah.
Are there any other examples that, people who are living in the bodies they were born in quite happily would never consider?
Yeah, that's I mean, the biggest one for me in terms of remembering what's from my talk is the clothes, but just things like toys. So again, I wasn't allowed an Action Man when I asked for it and things like that. And people, I think one of the things, and this goes for transitioning the amount of time it takes medically as well, which is where we need to forward things, is how stifling life can be when things that other people take for granted can't happen for you. So for me, you know, you may have heard of Erickson's life stages, which is where as we go through certain ages, things that happen to us, like if we have a trauma, it affects us psychologically going forward. I've done a little bit of counselling training, so I know that there is stuff in that. So imagine how important is playing. Well, that's how we learn to interact with our peers. We get coordination. You know, imagine a tiger in the wild going and hunting. That's how they learn to feed themselves. Playing is a really, really important part for any living animal. And yet, I wasn't allowed the toys that I wanted. And so psychologically, you know, it may not affect everyone because we all react differently, but that could have a massive impact on someone going forward because they just, you know, all that development. And the same for me, people go, oh, okay, well, you know, we're gonna go and you're gonna go get treatment, but the waiting list at the moment can be up to 5 years to even get a first appointment. And this is, like I say, this is something to really consider. Is at the age of 18, 19, 20, you're at a really, really important point in your life where you should be going out and finding your career path, finding who your peers are, you know, what groups of people do you fit in well with, etc., etc. And yet your life, it's all consuming transition because you don't know when you might have to have time off for surgery. You don't know, you're worried, you know, what if I start hormones and start looking like the gender I want to be, but they then, my next appointment, they say, no, you're not ready for surgery or you can't have it. There's all these fears and things, and it overtakes your entire life for possibly 10 years or more when you should actually just be finding your
Yeah.
feet in the world, and that can be really psychologically damaging as well. And this is why it's so important to just let people be themselves, because we will be happier, like I said earlier, and that's better for us and it's better for the world around us as well.
So you speaking is something that you've started doing more and more of over the last sort
Yeah.
of 5 years, and you talked that you also do mentoring, which is great. It's such a positive, inspirational story that you have. Why do you think it's important for companies and organisations to hear it, and stories like yours?
Yeah, good, great question. I think that people, like as I said earlier, it's still a really, really misunderstood topic. And the comments that I get are always, wow, I've not considered this, I've not considered that, I've learned so much, even down to I've learned more in that half hour than I've learned in my 30 previous years on the planet, which is like, wow. And it just shows me that people don't, you know, even people asking questions, they don't know what questions to ask because they don't know what they don't know. It's just, there's so much still to be learned. And I don't feel that you can, you know, you can't have empathy for something that you can't understand. And it's one thing to go in and do a bit of training and say, which, you know, that works in some, you know, was positives in every type of training, and just say, well, you need to do this and use these pronouns. But actually, for me, what I find works is hearing that lived experience. So by the time they've heard the half hour and they've heard my story and seen the changes and understand it, it makes people go, wow, okay, I get this now. How can I help? How can I be a better ally? What can I do? And it's very carrot and less stick.
Mm.
And it just, people, it's not hard work for people to then help because they want to.
And would you say that awareness is one of the key takeaways from your speeches?
It is, but I've got, there's one of the biggest things that I actually find that people take away, comment on, is I've got this little metaphor with a little frog, and it's all about the little frogs. I won't go into too much detail because people should just listen to the talk, but what it does is it demonstrates how you can be a better ally and how to start difficult conversations. That's one I get asked a lot is, we want to educate ourselves, we want to know more, but we don't know enough, and I'm scared that we'll say the wrong thing and upset people. And this metaphor shows that actually you don't need to know everything to start those conversations. And so, you know, it enables you to start the conversations, say the right things without upsetting people, how not to say the wrong things, and many, many, many different things. It's all about the little frog.
Oh, well, I need to
Very
find out more
powerful.
about that little frog. It sounds very powerful.
Yeah.
Finally, then, Matt, tell me, what gives you the biggest buzz about speaking?
Oh, I in
I can
general,
see, I can literally
yeah,
feel the
yeah,
passion of your
yeah,
talk.
yeah. I love speaking anyway. I'm really shy actually in social, which might actually be because of my background. But even since I was at school, English oral, the teacher says, you know, you can stand up, do a talk on any topic. I have absolutely loved it. So it's an area as a career that I love anyway. But I never thought I would be in a position where I say I'm lucky to have the story that I have. It's like, did I just say that? I'm lucky because for 40 years I didn't want to be alive. But now I can share this amazing journey that has shaped me into the person that I am today. And I'm very happy with who I am today. And I can share that with people. And then the feedback that I get from people afterwards means I'm doing something I love and I'm doing good for the world. And that, you know, and I get paid for it. So what better position could I be in compared to how I was at the beginning of my life? It's just fantastic.
Well,
So I
it's
think you
been,
get opportunities from people like yourselves as well that you know put me out there. So thank you.
well, it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. The positivity is just oozing off the screen as I'm talking to you. And I'm so glad that your experiences, you know, as upsetting as it was and
Yeah,
confusing as it was during so many years, has turned out to be something that you can move forward with and
yeah,
actually, you know, be happy and content
yeah.
and also tell your story in such a positive
Mhm.
way. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us
Mhm.
today. It's been a delight.
Yeah.
Now, if you'd like to book Matt to speak at your organisation, then simply contact myself or Steve at Great British Speakers on 01753 439 289, or you can email us bookings@greatbritishtalent.com. Matt, thank you once again.
Thank you.